Hi, everybody. So it's very interesting. I get a lot of questions about my knowledge or purported knowledge of ancient languages, dead languages. And yeah, I've done a lot of study. But when people say, "Hey, Thomas, do you speak ancient Egyptian?" Uh, that's a loaded question because we really don't have the vowels down. You know, we don't know if it was Kemet or Kemet, or this is the old name for Egypt. It meant black sand. It had to do with the Nile and the fertile soil around the Nile. But there's ancient Egyptian, and you've got Old Coptic, and it's divided geologically. Upper Egypt, you have the Sahadic or Thebic. You've got the Akhmimic, right? That's the Akhmimic is really very old, and then you've got the Nag Hammadi, which monastic codices were written on, and then you have Lower Egypt. You get into a whole different thing. You have the Bohairic, which is Memphitic, from Memphis, right? And that's a Delta language. You get the Fayumic, which is, basically fisherman's language, Nile River language, West Bank. And it survived until maybe the late 780s, and then you've got, Oxrhine which is, Mesochemic, or, here we go with the word chemic, chemet, right? It's all tied in together. The Coptic and Demotic languages are grammatically extremely close to late Egyptian, and by late Egyptian I mean hieroglyphs. And so the Coptic language flourished from maybe 200 AD, maybe a little earlier, to right around the time of the Black Death, and even today, the Bohairic dialect is the predominant liturgical language of the Coptic Orthodox Church in Alexandria that I've been to many times. And you would say hello by saying "Nofli." That's how you say hello, and they'll recognize that you understand a little bit of other language. So, as far as Egypt, it's been around. It was, a huge empire in ancient times. It ruled territory outside of the modern day borders. It ruled in Lebanon and Palestine and Syria and Israel and Cyprus and Sudan and so on and so forth. And it was also at other times in history occupied. The Nubians, the Romans, Persians, the Greeks, right? They all occupied it. Napoleon, as we know, right? And so, getting back to Kemet, or Kemet, that was a very early name for Egypt, and it meant the Black Land, literally. And so, scholars believe that when the Nile floods, which it does, all the time, and then it recedes, usually in August, it leaves, black soil, the color of tires. So that's that. So do I speak ancient Egyptian? No. As I was saying before, scholars don't really understand the vowels. We don't know the pronunciations. And we don't know what it sounds like after the consonants. We've got, okay, for Kemet, we've got the K down, the M down, the T down. But, there's all sorts of proposed alternative pronunciations out there. Just talk to some of the Egyptologists; they'll tell you. And you know, and there's a big difference between speaking a language and reading a language. Speaking and listening comprehension are certainly correlative, but they're separate skills. And since ancient Egyptian is, technically a dead language, it's not too popular. You see that a lot. Then you see other languages that are alive, like Farsi. Right? I've spoken some Farsi to you guys, right? Mantaram Farsi, Magram, Todaram Farsi, Magadi. It's I speak Farsi. Do you speak Farsi? And Farsi is related to Parsi. Parsi is the Indian description referring to anybody who is Persian. The word Farsi is an Arabized version of the same word. And you got to go back to the Zoroastrians. That's a religion that came out of Iran. It was, centered on the prophet Zoroaster. And it was originally in the language of Iranian Vedism, which is very, very similar to Indian Vedism. And the Zoroasters also had a lot of similarity in their faith with the Hindus. So if you read the texts of Zoroastrianism, you're going to see that they resemble Sanskrit. And so, it's definitely a relationship between, ancient Persian known as Avestan to Vedic Sanskrit language. And that's because there were waves of immigration from Iran to India after the Islamics invaded Iran in 638 AD. So, wars can bring derivations in language. Immigration does too. Time does too. After the Islamics invaded Iran, the first group of immigrants that wanted to get the hell out were members of the Sassanian royal family. And the Arab conquistadors would have taken their big swords and, chopped off their heads. And there was a second group that were sailors that came by sea, and then they would arrive at a place called Diuch, which is in Kathiawar, and then they headed up to Gujarat, and then you had the Qajar, talking like Q, here we go, Qajar dynasty, which were a bunch of Zoroastris that were, being persecuted and tortured, and they came from the city of Yazd, that's Yazd, and so they ended up with the Mughal Indians, and so they were known there as the Iranis, and ultimately that's where the word Aryan comes from. So it's all connected. We can go on and on about languages, but yeah, I do a little bit of study. I do most of music, but in the old days, linguistics was kind of an interest of mine. So I probably have forgotten more than I ever learned. Thanks for listening.